Hi, everybody. My name is Charlene Margot. Again, so glad to have you with us tonight. I know people are going to keep signing in. This has been an event that has created a lot of interest. We have more than 275 people signed up for tonight, which is awesome. Thank you so much to our keynote, Stuart Getty, author, and to our panelists, Zi Wen and Nayeli Duran. If you would like Spanish this evening, we have simultaneous interpretation with Trini Lara. So again, if you would like to hear this event in Spanish, please go to the globe icon, the circle at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and click on Spanish, and you will get automatic interpretation. There's also a note in the chat. So my name is Charlene Margot, and I'm the founder of the Parent Education Series and co-founder of nonprofit The Parent Venture. We could not be more delighted to bring this event to you tonight, How to They, Them, a guide to non-binary pronouns and the world of gender fluidity. Tonight's event is sponsored by Sequoia High School, the Sequoia High School Education Foundation, Sequoia Healthcare District, Peninsula Healthcare District, and the Parent Venture. We're going to begin with some remarks from the author, Stuart Getty, 15-20 minutes or so, and then we will be joined by our panelists, Zi Wen and student Nayeli Duran, who are with us tonight. So we really want to hear from you, the audience. You'll see at the bottom of your screen, I'm sure everybody's used to Zoom by now, but this is a webinar format, just a reminder. Please put your comments in the chat. My partner, Bev Hartman, will be putting resource links there too, as well as the survey at the end of the event. So comments in the chat, questions in the Q&A. We really want to hear your questions. If you can, keep them brief. We want to get to as many of them as we can this evening. We are video recording this event tonight with our partners from the Boys and Girls Club of the Peninsula. Thank you, Jacob Crowell and your team at Boys and Girls Club. We have a video library on YouTube that is free and open to the public. We've had 18,000 views on the video library, including 13,000 views since COVID. So we know that these events are reaching a lot of parents, educators, students, and community members, which is awesome. All right, let me tell you a little bit about tonight's presenter and our panel. Stuart Getty is a genderqueer writer and filmmaker who lives in sunny Oakland with their wife, Nora, cat Princess Magic Face, and dog Meadow. They make films and show them at film festivals sometimes, and also do speaking engagements about they and gender at places like Creative Mornings, Pecha Kucha, and SXSW. They enjoy puzzles, jumping in cold water, that sounds crazy, and shredding on rollerblades, of course. Zi Wen is an educator in the Special Education Department at Sequoia High School and advisor to the Gender and Sexuality Alliance GSA Club. She is also raising a gender nonconforming child, so if you have questions about that, they are welcome tonight. Nayeli Duran is a student at Sequoia High School and also co-president of the Gender and Sexuality Alliance Club. So welcome everybody this evening. We are honored and delighted to have you with us. Stuart, take it away.
Woo! Wow. First off, thank you so much, everyone on the panel. And wow, the numbers keep growing, 124 of you out there. So thank you to all of you for joining. I feel humbled and honored. I am calling in from my high school bedroom, which is actually maybe very apropos, but I'd love to introduce myself to you. Hello, I am Stuart Getty. And as I said, Kentucky is where I'm calling in from. That's my senior pic. That's in the hallway. My mom loves the senior picture. I did make her pay extra for that soft glow. And yes, I still do have the pearls, but I definitely feel more like myself now. I do make films. I started about 10 years ago making content around they specifically, because that's about when I started finding it. So if you want to check out thegettybrothers.com, that's my film site, has a bunch of pieces that I've made. One played at Sundance, one played at South by Southwest. I am deeply passionate about storytelling in a human way around these topics that in our culture feel a little bit like wrist slappy and you can't ask questions. And I think I just feel very called to those conversations. obviously I wrote this book, which is one of those conversations. How to they them, and the world of gender fluidity is something I've known my whole life, but for the last 2 years this has been my baby. And I like to show this because a lot of these folks that gave me little quotes are kind of heroes of mine, so I'm really touched. Eileen Miles, poet, philosopher, very cool. I like to start this by saying, wow, I could not have done this book without my illustrator, Brooke Thing, who also worked at IDEO at the time. Also the sports hat I saw on the second day at IDEO and was like, hey, that's a gay. This was the very first drawing I sent to Brooke when we were like, hey, let's write this book. Luckily, she's really, really good, and she turned it into beautiful things like this. This was always the first two pages of the book in our pitch, and it also came to fruition in just that way as well. So they it good. Gently place your tongue against the inside of your front two teeth. Now blow until the whistling sound lightly emerges. Say it, don't spray it. Now open the mouth to say A, as in the letter A, or the sound Canadians make at the end of sentences, kind of. Or like a friend is driving by in a car and you want to get their attention. Now try it together. A, say. It's literally that easy for your mouth. But your brain, well, that's a little harder. But don't worry, I got you. And that's the tone of the voice. It's a little bit of smart ass. It's a lot of humor. It's definitely trying to have a lot of humanity and empathy. We all have neural pathways that have told us that they is for plural. And now we have this quote unquote new way of doing that. And so it's compassion on both ways, of compassion for those that are trying to learn it and compassion for us that are trying to just be seen. And so this was the start of us believing in this book. And so we put the pitch together, and then I'm a writer by trade, but I had to draw each and every page of this book because it's small and it is illustrated. So I had to figure out how many words and how many pictures and how does the flow, which was really fun, but also was really challenging because I'm not an illustrator. I like to show this page. Also, it got cut, but I did want to do a shout out to pagers. Hope some of you all remember when there were lots of pagers in the world. I start with my story in the book. I start with my personal story. And yes, I love to rollerblade. So you'll see rollerblades within here. Hi, I'm Stuart. I was born in Louisville, Kentucky, Catherine Stuart Getty. I'm in Louisville, Kentucky right now. Kentucky is known for horses, good bourbon, and fried chicken. Not gay stuff, but boy, was I gay. It was in me all along, the feeling of being not quite female, not quite male, not quite like the other girls. Growing up in Kentucky, I was a tomboy, a weird little kid. Think bowl cut, buck teeth, skin knees. Tomboy was this okay category for girls who like to do boy things and wear boy clothes. Maybe there was a touch of shame or guilt to it, to not be what a female should be. Being a tomboy was like second tier almost, like a girl, but not the best kind of girl. I was good at sports. I lettered and won rings, tomboy. It gave me a free pass from wearing dresses and frilly things mostly, except to church and some fancy dinners. And every time I would cry and refuse and throw my salmon libbies at the door. Some people here will remember salmon libbies. Some won't. Usually I lost the fight and ended up tear-stained, hiding wrecked knees under itchy white tights. Ugh, those tights. Laura Ashley Paisley's headbands with bows on them, all of it, just no. So growing up, I'd get, oh, she's sporty, a jock. These words we carry, they craft who we become. And I think it may have helped me to just start out living outside of the stereotypical gendered norms, like how I dressed, how I spoke, how I wrestled with my brother. Perhaps I was louder and more of a class clown because I got to step outside of what a little girl was supposed to be. Perhaps the word tomboy opened up this new taste of gender freedom. It's important to think about what the power of words. So the book goes on to sort of tell more of my story, especially this moment at camp where I saw older counselors just living their best gay lives. And I didn't know they were gay. I just was like, wow, they have happy trails, they wear Birkenstocks, they wear tie-dye, they were so free, they were so cool. And it just really made me realize that some places people are being held in that freedom and that openness. And it was really helpful for me to see that. I like to tell that to parents, you know? So it talks about the transition. I used to go by Kate, and then it was Stuart. And how did that happen? At first, it was only in some circles, just my queer friends. And then at work, I'd be Kate. So it was like Kate in the front, Stuart in the back, but party all over. Sort of like a mullet, you know? And I talk about like pronoun circles. I talk about the importance of owning weird as a concept and thinking about if you're sort of different, a lot of times it's because you're sort of ahead of what's coming. I know that maybe that sounds really egotistical, but I love the word weird. When I was little, I loved being weird. And I do think maybe it is a weird little pronoun for some people. It's new brain pathways, but weird is okay. And weird means growth is happening. Weird is what pushes us to the edges so we can stretch and grow and be more. I love weird. I'm a weirdo. So I also did a thing at IDEO and beyond where I just asked everyone, I did it on my Facebook, I did it on my Instagram, I asked everyone, what are your questions? And then I put them in this section, not all of them, but the ones that, you know, I synthesized, and people were asking the same things over and over. And I was like, awesome, this is straight from their mouth. So there's all sorts of stuff in that section. There's a section for teachers, there's a section for professionals, for parents like Z. One of the things that came up the most in the questions is, what do I do if I mess up? So I like to just cover this. And the first thing I like to say in the spirit of compassion is that if you were hanging out with me and my friends, you'd hear us mess up sometimes. You'd hear us say she when it's someone they, and in the minute that we say it, we correct it. And that's my advice. If you can, in the second that you make the mistake, correct yourself, that's the way to do it. And then if you need to later say, I'm so sorry, one-on-one to that person, that's awesome. But in that moment, as quickly as we can keep things moving, that makes it feel more just, oops, like as if you said the wrong word and you knew it and you moved on. And it makes it less about making the mistake and the ally or the, you know, the friend's shame in that moment of, oh no, I did it wrong, which I get from some people. And I also at work when they do it, I'm like, we're on the clock, like you're wasting time. Like I love efficiency. So yeah, I think it's also with a lot of heart if you can just correct it as quickly as possible. One story I want to tell you is that my brother brought a blowhorn to dinner last night. My parents are still learning how to do they all the way. It's been about 9-10 years and they still mess up. And my brother read on the internet that you can use a blowhorn. And I didn't think he would actually do it, but he showed up at dinner and he did it 3 times. And then the rest of dinner, they used they. So I'm not necessarily recommending it, but my parents were like wincing after, because it was quite loud. I don't necessarily recommend it, but it was very, very helpful. And I did cry a little because I was very touched that my brother had been such a great ally in that moment. So that's what I'm saying. Fix it, move on, let life keep living. There's other hot tips in here. I like to show this one because I fought very hard for this cake, but this is about gender reveal parties, which some people are like, wow, yeah. Not only do they sometimes catch the forest on fire, which in California we're like, but also they can be considered transphobic to some communities. I like to make a little joke that it's a junk alert or an anatomy announcement, that all you know at the time of that is what their junk is going to look like. So this is kind of a joke of like, congrats, it's a peen. And then the joke is, my child has a penis, their gender is TBD, check back in a few years, enjoy the cake and our grayscale color scheme. Get it? No pink or blue. Which I actually found out that pink and blue was completely socially constructed. And back in this is in the book, 1800s or something. Yeah, it was completely different. Yeah, you knew it, Z. You got it. Another hot tip is don't ask trans people about their junk. I put it on a plastic bag because, you know, on plastic bags, how they say, like, do not put this bag. This is not a toy. Do not put it over your head and breathe deep. Well, they have to put it on there because some people do it. I had to put this in the book because people do ask. Would you ask anybody else about their junk? Probably not. I like to show this because this is what Stuart drew. This is what Brooke, she's an amazing artist. But it makes the point that those folks that identify as non-binary, genderqueer, gender fluid, they can wear all sorts of things to express it. And it's not necessarily an external thing all the way. And so it's great to never make assumptions. Also boxer shorts. And I don't know if you guys can see this, but we had this long beard and a wizard hat that made it in here, which I'm very proud of, very proud of. Yes, indeed. There's also some do's and don'ts, like do ask pronouns, but don't call them preferred pronouns. In the beginning of using pronouns, they were called preferred pronouns. And then people were like, wait, we don't just prefer this, we are this. And so if you have heard preferred, it's probably just because it's outdated information. No worries. But it's 2021. They're not preferred anymore. That's our gender. Here's for sort of some workplace stuff. Do put pronouns and name tags on email signatures. I notice I have one on Zoom. It's becoming more and more popular at my work. Also, don't avoid pronoun talk in places where gender queer people are absent. I think that it feels really good when I hear that conversations have happened even when I'm not there that would have been protective of my gender expression. And just think about how cool I'll feel going into that room since it's been set up in such a nice way with all of those, you know, the boundaries and the honor and respect that comes with that. So cool. This one did come from my work, and that is someone from IDEO who says girl all the time and was like extremely worried that when he said girl to me, I was worried, or I was, you know, I was offended. I don't really get offended when I know that he's not saying that I am like a female, he's just using the language. But I did want to give other, you know, words to try. I recently watched Legendary, which is like the voguing competition that's on the HBO, and every time they say ladies and gentlemen, they say ladies and gentlemen and genderqueers. And I was like, wow, that really just does it, doesn't it? Like, I'm here, you're here, we're all here. Cool. So that was one that just came up. The thing about men and women restrooms is that I will be in the wrong restroom because if I have to choose between the binary options. So sometimes people will be kind of like, whoa, you're in the wrong restroom. And what they mean is I look like I just flew here and I had this happen in the Kentucky restroom. And a woman was like, this is not the men's room. And I was like, I am not a man, which is sometimes I just say I am a woman in those moments because I'm just like, but technically, unless I'm in a one-holer, I am maybe in the wrong bathroom, or and then I'd be asking, why are you in this small room with me? There is a section about stuff that's not great for GNC folks, which is gender non-conforming folks, not GNC, the nutrition company. One thing that is, I was just mentioning flying, because flying is pretty, it can be trying sometimes for our gender neutral and trans folks. One thing that I like to educate about is that there is in this, in the thing where you put the scanner where you put your hands over your head, right before you're going in, they clock you pink or blue. So you're walking through and they look at you and they make an assumption of like, this person's gender is boop. And because I show up like this, a lot of times people will push blue, and then pretty much without fail, if I go through this scanner, I get a back of the hand pat down. a couple years ago, I was in Kentucky, and the lady, I was hands over my head. She's like hovering over she was like, looks to her friend, the other TSA guy. He's like, doesn't know what to push. And then I lean forward and I say, push pink. And she goes, oh, I'm sorry, honey. I just didn't even know. And I said, me either, my whole life. But now I'm TSA pre-check, because you do not have to go through those machines with TSA pre-check. But it brings up also the TSA, doctor's offices, drop-down menus, other stuff that's just not so great for our friends that are non-binary and myself. And so in the back, there are some stuff for just if you're having a business, or if you're having an outwardly facing, communication. There's just some good notes in here of like, don't assume someone's gender. Use gender neutral terms if you can. Don't sir or ma'am people. If you're in a retail experience, or even you're at the mall, when malls open again, and someone asks you, where's the restroom? Like the men's is over here, the females is over here. You don't want to in that moment do that, where you might say the men's over here, the females over here. It's just good to keep that open, especially in a business capacity. But there's lots of tips in here for all sorts of people. I like to say that my secret audience for this was actually my mom, who, it's not so secret anymore because I say it all the time on my book tour. She loves that. But she's in her 70s. She is extremely liberal and well-meaning. It's just really hard for her. But I think that there's something for everyone in this book, because I've written it more about the concept of gender freedom. And I think that's maybe the thesis of my whole book is right here, is like, it's more than just pronouns and grammar lessons and arguments about bathrooms. This is about freedom of expression and the human right to choose for oneself how to identify oneself. And while they might be only for some, that freedom is for everyone. So let's grab it. And yeah, this is the last page of my book. And this is a message specifically to trans folks, gender non-conforming folks. You are not alone. We are sacred. And that's it. Yes, indeed.
Thank you, Stuart. Thank you, thank you. I just thought that was wonderful. And for decades, I've been telling people about that buttons at the airport, and no one believes me. It's true, isn't it?
It is true. A lot of people that don't match the outside, what maybe their inside parts will say, because I've asked TSA agents, well, why do you do that? And they're like, you could be storing things, and so we have to assume body parts. And I was like, this just seems like such a faulty process, just even them saying that to me. But they're doing their job.
Absolutely. Z, you had a comment about that regarding your wife. Would you share it?
Yeah, my wife is gender nonconforming. She identifies as a butch. And I had no idea, actually, that I always wondered, why do they always pull her aside? like she gets, I just assumed she was, because she's BIPOC, like she's darker skinned than me. But yeah, she got pulled aside. She would get, at least 50% more often than I do, just because I'm gendered more, quote unquote, traditionally. But now, I'm going to tell her that. I had no idea that there was that button. Yeah, it's unfortunate.
So, but I remember,
doesn't it scan, through our stuff? Like, don't we all look like bones on the inside?
Well, I'm thinking, what are they thinking about is like smuggling things. And so crevices of a body is what they're scanning, right? So different places to put things, without going in too much detail. But it just feels faulty. But TSA pre-check, you don't have to do that.
well, in the spirit of an open discussion, and I remember Z with your wife when you came again more than a decade ago, and you two stood up there and said, ask us anything, right? Ask us anything. So here's the first question in the spirit of ask anything. Stuart, why do you use they instead of he, him?
Because I don't identify as a man.
Good answer.
I use Stuart, which throws people into thinking that, and I'm masculine of center. I show up like this. I always have, even when I'm in that pearl in the soft glow. I was still like, hey, I've got 2 state championship softball rings. I did get those. My house is sort of a shrine to my softball days. It's really funny. Anyway, I don't identify as a man. I identify as something sort of in a fluid space, not male or female. But I love butch lesbians. I sort of identify as a butch dyke as well, which is really confusing if you say like gender nonconforming and butch dyke, but it's
you can be both. You can be both. And as I say to my children, like, you know, I ask them every day, like, are you a boy or a girl or a boy girl or neither today? And my youngest is very much so. She likes to say, I'm Enzo. Her name is Enzo. She's 3.5. And since she's been able to talk, she'll just say, I'm Enzo. And my oldest will, I'm a boy today, I'm a girl today, I'm a boy girl today. Yeah. So I think there's a, you know, it's like, why can't we be, right? Like, this is who we are. What is the world to say who we are as individual people? And the bigger question is why does it matter? And sort of hearing you go through your book, Stuart, something that stood out for me was, you know, that a lot of times it's about like the inconvenience on other people. Like, it's inconvenient for you to say they, them, but why is the inconvenience of trying to say they, them more so than my personhood, right? My identity, who I am as a human being, and being seen in that. Like, why do we uphold this idea of, well, why can't you just fit in? Or it's just so annoying, right? Or to you know, I'm just gonna mess it up. It doesn't fit with grammar. Like, I just feel like oftentimes these the pushback is this, like, oh, it's like my identity, my personhood is an inconvenience to you kind of feel to it, right? And I see that. I don't experience that as a person, right? As a they, them, or a gender non-conforming person. But it's interesting to see that happen to my children now that I'm like growing up. And then there's definitely that like tiger mom instinct being like, you know, don't force my kid to be something that they're not. So yeah, that's something that that came up as you were going through your story.
So Nayeli, since you are bravely here holding down the student body perspective, what do you most want parents or caregivers to understand about gender pronouns and people who are gender fluid?
Well, I think Stuart mentioned earlier, you know, don't assume people's pronouns by the way they look. I present more female because of, you know, the way I grew up. I just was pushed more towards that, being in a more like Latin household. And I think parents have to, like Z does, give their kids like the freedom to choose how they want to present, how they want to express themselves. Really not force, you know, them to use specific pronouns. Just be really, I would say, be transparent with them, because a lot of times we just want to understand what our parents are thinking and what they're feeling and about the whole situation. And it's not that it's a situation, it's just in general in life, as we grow, as we learn who we are, you know, just don't make assumptions on all that and be open to what your child has to offer.
Thank you. Good point. Z, as advisor for the GSA, which I know is a really vibrant group at Sequoia, what do you want to add to that in terms of what young people are thinking and feeling. We have a really supportive group online. Love your book, Stuart. People are asking where they can buy it. I think you can buy it on Amazon, right? Or your local bookstore, many local bookstores.
Yes, Amazon, local bookstores, bookshop.org, I think also, Barnes and Nobles, Target. I went,
Target.
TJ Maxx in the Midwest. I found out I hit TJ Maxx in the Midwest. I've gone Midwestern. Yes.
I guess what I would add is, oh, my dog's a little crazy. I guess what I would add is, for a lot of students, it's right, sort of coming back to the inconvenience for people versus like really validating a student, a person's identity. When we express our inconvenience of using they, them, we are expressing like an invalidating of their personhood. And I think if, I love how, Stuart, you're really sort of bringing this empathy and humor to the text, because we're trying to just sort of see each other as people. Now we're all in some way, shape, form, or another just trying to be who we are and figure out what that is, and that's an ever evolving process. And working with teenagers, I mean, I love working with teenagers because specifically that, I chose to work with teenagers because I love this time period where they're figuring out who they are, what do they stand for, and part of that is both sexuality and gender identity. And some of the work I do at Sequoia is to teach the staff. I usually run a SOGI, workshop every year, every few years. SOGI stands for sexual orientation and gender identity, and expression. To just talk about how important these aspects are to young people in growing up, in figuring out who they are. And we have to remember that our community, the queer community, the LGBTQ plus community are we have very high levels of depression, anxiety, suicide rates. The way that we treat both our children and our students, and in these little ways in which we invalidate their personhood through something like gender identity, adds to that a great deal. So I hear that all the time from students, right? Sometimes they come in to GSA and are like, ugh, so-and-so teacher misgendered me, or used the wrong pronouns, and then and it's like an annoyance. And then sometimes they come in and it's like, this is the umpteenth time, it's just happened so many times that I'm really feeling I can't hold it anymore. I'm really feeling just not able to be myself. And especially for teenagers, I think that's such a big part of that process of growing up.
Absolutely. Thank you, Z. So we're getting questions, and I think this is common. People are they're trying to get educated, but they're also afraid to make mistakes. So we have a couple questions here around specifically pronouns. Could you touch on she, they, and he, they? And also a parent is asking organizations like Gender Spectrum, which is a great organization, lots of wonderful resources, parents, uses the term gender expansive. Is that still an appropriate term?
Yeah. To Stuart Getty, yeah, I think it's great. I think you could check in with your community as you're using it, those that would hear it and say, does this feel right to you? To me, gender expansive, gender creative, gender fluid, all of those are amazing. And the other part of that question,
The she, they, and he, they.
I don't do that, but I have some folks at work, and I wanted to get an answer because I can't comment from a personal experience. that is a very pure usage of gender fluidity, of feeling different things different days. Sometimes waking up and being, I'm a she today, and then the next day is, I'm really feeling non-binary today. Sometimes you can even see folks express that in how they dress, where you see a skirt one day and the next day a tux, and so I think that goes to that earlier conversation about fluidity and not assuming. And something I would say with kids is they're on journeys, and they might be like, I'm a trans boy, and then 2 years later it might not be true, but it's also all part of a valid journey. I think, not to keep confusing, but openness to express oneself. Yeah.
Nayeli, do you have a comment or a
Nayeli, let's just say Nayeli can.
Yeah, if I can add to that. So I used to use she, they, him for about 3 months. That was when I was figuring out where I lied, like on the gender spectrum, and when I was deciding on non-binary or gender fluid, things like that. And I think people use he, they, she, they. At least personally, it was just when I was discovering who I was and where, like, my identity and all that. And sometimes people just need that flexibility in how they express themselves. And I also have people in classes. I thought this was a really interesting thing. People use he, they, or she, they because they're trying to normalize the use of they. So that's really interesting. And I would do that as well when I was an ally as well, before I entered the GSA. Just because I saw people doing that and I thought it was really cool.
Well, see, Stuart, we can learn all kinds of stuff every day from the teenagers, right?
Heck yeah.
Heck yeah. So here's a question. I think this is a good one. Does the word queer have connotations? I don't understand if it's an acceptable word to use and how to use it.
We used to say gay and now we say queer, but I've actually heard that the Gen Z is back to gay.
Yeah, I'm interested in Nayeli, your generation of, I think it's a generational thing. So queer was definitely had negative connotation, historically used, and it's one of those like take back words. I identify as queer, and so, in some contexts, I was like trying to think of, I saw it in the chat and I was starting to write and I was like, it's complicated. I think in some contexts, sometimes it's one of those words that I feel like within the community almost is said. In other contexts, not, right? Like if you're speaking about sort of the queer community. But I would feel weird if you're like, if a non-queer person came up to me and was like, so you're queer, huh? Or you're, right? Like you're queer. I don't know. I think it's come off sort of with a negative connotation to me, even from folks that don't mean it in that kind of way. So I think it can be a complicated word, but for me and for a lot of folks in my generation, I'm in my late 30s, it's more of a reclaimed word.
Yeah, I heard a lot from my sisters. They're also in their 30s now, that it was reclaimed. Because when I first was identifying myself, I did use queer, just because in whatever research I did then, I learned that it was used as like an umbrella term as to you fall anywhere in the LGBTQ community. So I just use it as a term, yeah.
That's why I like it. It's actually way more open, and there's not lesbian, gay, like it doesn't make you have to go into a box, especially if you consider yourself fluid, so you might fit in a couple boxes there. Yeah, so it's opening up and freedom, but also over 50, if you say it around them, they might actually wince at it and think, wow, that is definitely a slur. And it's an example of how people want to take power back to themselves and their communities around these words that were used to subjugate us.
So here's a question I love, Stuart. This one's for you. And I think as somebody who spent my life with kids and families and parents, I love this question. Stuart, if you were with children around 5 to 7 years of age, and Z, you can weigh in, like grades 1 to 3, how would you explain themselves? Is there a format that we parents can use to guide our children to ask the right way? Like trying to explain.
Trying to help the child hold it, or to explain just the concept?
I think to explain the concept, like how would you explain? Yeah. Z, does that sound like what this question is about?
Yeah. I think when they wrote themselves, maybe if you wrote that, you could
I think
clarify.
that they are referring to you.
Yeah, me.
Yeah. If you were talking,
it's interesting. I was doing a film around a speech therapist, and was noticing that she was doing, you know, the pronouns and using like cues to get the person to work on like she, he, and like saying different words. And in that moment, she would the speech pathologist was being filmed by 2 people who used they, them pronouns, and both of us were kind of side-eyeing each other, being like, this is an interesting moment that we're not included in this. And that's a teaching exercise where you're basically showing them they're around 4 to 5, and they know that they're supposed to try to use these words to divide people into over here or over there. And I think it's a great exercise to think of as teachers, educators, in those moments, if you did hold space for that non-binary moment. And you had the doll that was non-binary. Sometimes I say you can use Stuart if you don't have friends in your life that use they, them pronouns. You can say, you know, Z is a woman, uses she, da da da, and Tony over here, he uses he. And if you don't, I think the best thing that has worked for young folks that I've seen is you show them someone, and you explain that they don't identify as either man or woman, and they use this pronoun, and I've seen that done with young folks. I'm curious, Z, you probably have lots to say.
I was gonna jump in. Kids are way better at this than adults are. They just are. They don't, you say, oh yeah, you know, Stuart goes by they. So we say they, them. We don't say he, or we don't say she. And they're like, cool. Like it's insane. It's just really amazing how children don't fall into the binaries as ease, you know, or can be much more flexible. So I was, you know, and I was trying to put this in the chat. I did a book reading. Nayeli and I both did some book readings for Trans Visibility Day for the Redwood City Library wow, is that 2 months ago now, Nayeli? Crazy. Was it 1 month? I don't know, my brain is so crazy. No, we're at the end of May. It was at the end of March. And there's a great book recording, of course, like end of the day brain. I can't remember the title of the book, but if you go to the link I put into the chat, you can see the book. And it's a great book that helps young children sort of understand gender identity, they, them pronouns as well. Yes, COVID, I've got Zoom brain, just like spend the whole day teaching. And in the same way that you would sort of say to an adult, like, oh, Stuart goes by they, them, and have that quick correction and move on. I do it the same way with children. I find that children pick it up much more quickly than adults.
Well said. And people are asking about resources, and I know you have resources at the end of your book, Stuart. And so if there's other things, Z or Nayeli, we will send a follow-up email to attendees to give them some more resources, because people are really asking, how do you join GSA? Do other high schools in the Sequoia Union High School District have GSAs? Are you still the Gay Straight Alliance at some schools instead of the Gender and Sexuality alliance? Just quickly, Z or Nayeli, those kind of questions.
Sorry, I couldn't unmute. For the gay straight alliance and the gender and sexuality alliance, I think we're trying to separate ourselves a little bit from gay and straight because it's very exclusive of other identities and other genders and all that. So gender and sexuality alliance is more inclusive, but I know that some people still use the other term.
I
And
feel like we got super lucky that like GSA translated so easily because
I know.
it was like perfect translation too. And then, yeah, I think some folks are even changing, they're even moving away from GSA in general, even though it can be right about gender sexuality alliance, to various other titles. Again, COVID brain, I can't remember those. Do you remember any other groups we've like connected with over the years, Nayeli, that don't go by GSA? Okay. And I did put the title of the book, It Feels Good to Be Yourself by Teresa Thorne and Noah Gridney in the chat. I like read that book with my kids at least a couple times a week.
Well, we are getting to the end of our time together, but we have a lot of questions. Are you folks okay for a few more minutes? Okay. Z and Stuart, could you explain that term SOGI for people who are unfamiliar with it? Are we moving past or beyond LGBTQ? We've got a lot of letters now in that acronym. What do we say?
SOGI just stands for sexual orientation and gender identity and expression. What's happening a lot in support of both in schools, in businesses, in a lot of places, people are asking for this kind of like trainings on like, how do I address, these different identities. And so it's just like a quick term to help folks understand like, what is this workshop about or what is this panel about? In terms of LGBTQIA+, again, I'm with Stuart. I love the word queer because it's like this nice umbrella encompassing term. I think for both sort of the LGBTQIA+ and using they, them, it's just about just keep trying to practice it, use it, have conversations. The more you practice, the more you use, the easier, more quickly it's sort of right that you can recall it.
So here's a question from a parent who I think this is probably a typical feeling of someone who has a non-binary child. So this parent asks, I'm the parent of a GNC child and people who meet me for the first time ask, do you have a boy or a girl? And then I have to decide in a split second how to explain this, which I do pretty easily now, depending upon how receptive or confused the person is I'm talking to. Do you have any answers or suggestions a parent can say to add to my library of explanations?
No.
It's a good question.
Do you have
None
a boy?
of the above.
No. Do you have a boy or a girl? No. And they're looking at your kid and they say, excuse me? And you say, my child is non-binary. That's if you're a bit of a smart ass like Stuart, but, or you could just say, yeah, actually I have a non-binary child, or gender non-conforming, gender, whatever your child would like to be said.
This
Yeah.
actually, I like to turn to my child and ask them. So this happened literally 2 weeks ago. Mazzy started a swim class and we got in. Mazzy wears her hair very short. And we got in and the swim instructor was like, she, Like, what is, and I turned to Mazzy and I was like, Maz, are you a boy or a girl today, or a boy girl? And she was like, I'm a girl. And I was like, oh, what pronouns do you want to go by? And I think that does a couple of things. Again, the importance of validating the child's identity, right? The importance that they have a voice in that. And it shows other people that, like, it's not our right? It's not our job. That's the word. Um, it's like, it's her decision to tell us who she is, and we've got to respect that. And I think that's, I think it models to other adults, like, a child is a person, they have their own voice that they get to also, right, share and speak up about themselves. So that's generally, I ask my children in front of the person, like, how they identify, and that helps them to also understand that there is something more than, girl or boy.
Okay, and then so Z, you just sort of interpret as needed depending upon how that interaction goes?
Mhm.
Or are people pretty cool with what your child says? I hope they are.
Yeah, I mean, I'm in the Bay Area though. So for the
Not in
most part,
Kentucky.
part, it's cool. And I haven't had any issues. Yeah, I mean, I feel really privileged and lucky for that. But I also, I have to, unfortunately, sort of like prepare my kid to be like, hey, sometimes people may not be okay with this, or tell you how to identify, and it might make you mad, and or it might make you sad, and that's okay. Like, you can talk to them about it, you can talk to us when you come home. And I'm sure it's not going to be easy. She's not in kindergarten yet, so. And I change the pronouns in terms of what I use with my child a lot, just because Mazzy hasn't settled on something, on pronouns. Like, she changes them every day.
Okay, this is a pronoun question. It might be for Nayeli. Is ellos used in Spanish for the non-binary they? We know that this indicates a masculine plural. Normally ellos would be feminine, but can you tell us whether that holds true in Spanish? Are there non-binary pronouns?
Well, it kind of falls into the same category as the word Latinx and Latine. People started stop using the word Latinx, and they turned more to Latina. And the same thing happened with ellos, where I used to use ellos in my Spanish class, but people, because Spanish is really gendered with the whole masculine, feminine, I started using ella, which I don't think it's an actual word, but neither is Latina, and so it just helps, adapt Spanish to non-binary, gender fluid, non-conforming people.
So how do you spell Latine, Nayeli, versus Latinx?
Oh, I can put that in the chat.
Could you? We are all trying to get educated here tonight. A parent is asking what to do if you accidentally out your child before they're ready. Like, someone asked their child that question about pronouns and the parent answered and the child was upset. Any advice for those kinds of miscues?
I mean, I think apologize. I think something about what Z was just saying about in that moment, some kids might not love to be the one that has to say their gender in that moment because they're on that journey. And I think it's similar of, like, if you do cross a boundary, it's a time to actually have a really deep conversation about consent, also about, like, crossing boundaries and saying, wow, I really messed up there, and, like, I really see you and want to validate you. And if sometimes people out me in circles because they're really excited to be the ally that's holding that for me. And in those cases, I'm more open. And I think it's just come from a really open place. Apologize and say that you do see them, and that yeah, and check in, I think, along the way, you know, and like I'm sure that Z has had check-ins with your kid before you're doing that in the moment. But I think it's like really trying to create comfortable things for these kids. I saw another question that was like, am I doing a disservice by not telling like the grandparents that my kid has started using they? And I think there's a section in my book about the gifts, and like the grandparents give gifts. And this is also kind of related to the McDonald's drive-through boy toy, girl toy, of like a lot of stuff is like that. And it's a lot of, you know, the holiday gifts might come in and it's a race car and it's a din-da-da. And sometimes I just want to interrogate like why we have gendered these things in the first place. When I was young, I used to be like, can you just say I'm a boy so I can get the cool toy at McDonald's and not the Barbie head or whatever they gave. We didn't do McDonald's a lot, but you know, every once in a while. So I think it's holding, I kind of went on a little ramble, but I think it's also, there's a lot of stuff changing and the definitions are becoming more fluid. And I think it's always a great conversation to have more conversations about asking your kids what they want and giving them more autonomy and more authority over who they become. And then they turn out to be like Nayeli, who's like a really strong, like up here holding it, you know. And I probably just want to say thank you to your parents and your teachers probably also for being there and supporting you.
Nayeli came out of the womb like that. Just super awesome. I'm completely sure of it.
Well, I just really want to thank all of you today for educating us and your openness, and everybody online with us for the wonderful questions. We're going to have to do this again, Stuart, because we can't leave with 25 unanswered questions, right? So we have just a couple minutes. Z, Nayeli, then Stuart. Any final words or pieces of advice for us today? Typically, I ask people what gives you hope, but in this case, you might have something else you'd like to express.
I really like that question. I want to answer that question.
Well, then
Charlene.
Go ahead. It's my favorite question to end events with. What gives you hope?
You know, young people like Nayeli give me hope. When I come to even in GSA on Zoom, I am just floored with how open and empathetic and compassionate and brilliant you know, young people are and are bringing our world forward. I mean, the kind of things that I see, and expanding outside of GSA, but even right sort of in my English classes and in these IB classes, and having these amazing conversations around gender identity. Yeah, that gives me a lot of hope. I think my one word of advice is, you know, you're gonna F up and it's okay, right? If we come out with positive regard, a willingness to learn, a willingness to practice. And again, right, I come back to that, seeing each other, validating each other as human beings. That's what this is all about. It's about validating another person's personhood.
Thank you, Z. You have added so much to tonight's conversation. Really, thank you. All right, Nayeli, you did a super duper job standing up for all the teenagers of the world. What gives you hope?
I think what gives me hope is the idea that there'll be one day where, you know, being a teenager, you're in that place where you're like, you're still a child, but you're growing up into an adult, and there's that lack of a lack of what you can do and, you know, what you can not accomplish, but, you know, there's those like limits in life. And I think a really big one is like expression. So I think I'm very hopeful of like the day where I can be fully myself and not have to, you know, limit myself within like boundaries set from like the context around me.
My guess is, Nayeli, you're going to do a lot of educating of a lot of people along your journey. Yeah, for sure. Stuart, you have to have the last word because you wrote the book.
I wrote a book, not the book.
I
I think Nayeli could write the next one.
she could.
Yeah, they could. This panel gives me hope. You know, educators, parents, students, seeing that being held with a lot of intention and a lot of care. I think the more that we do that, the better the conversations become, the better the seeing of each other becomes. And I think that's what it's all about, is breaking down these ways that society has built up, how we're so different from each other, how we shouldn't see each other. And I'm a big hippie, tie-dyes, Birkenstocks. But I do think that that is the future. And I know that we're in a rough spot coming out of it as a country, and it feels, you know, there feels like hope in when things die. And I think that our country's going through a reckoning. There's sprouts of new things. And I think that they and gender fluidity is leading into, you know, women and men also looking at their gender identities and all the things that have been told to them, like women should be in the kitchen, men should be big and strong and in a truck or whatever. So I think freedom for everyone is coming, and we are fighting for it, and I'm excited. So thanks for everyone being here, because this gave me hope.
Well, thank you, Stuart Getty and Z Wen and Nayeli Duran, for your brilliance and your openness and your willingness to just answer every question tonight. Thank you, everybody, for coming. Really appreciate it. Stay well, take care, and we hope to see you again soon. Good night, everybody.